Hello, I'm Adam Wren,
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Tuesday, July 29th.
and this is the Playbook Podcast. And here's what's driving the day. The big story around the world right now is what's happening in Gaza, and we're seeing it ripple through domestic politics in surprising ways. On the policy side of things, President Donald Trump appears to be making his first substantive break with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over Gaza. On Sunday night, Netanyahu denied the extensive and well-documented reports of a humanitarian disaster, saying, quote, "There is no starvation in Gaza." But yesterday, President Trump was asked whether he agreed. He said that, quote, "Based on television, I would say not particularly, because those children look very hungry. They have to get food and safety right now." Dasha, this was quite a striking moment. You think of Donald Trump often as a president or as a businessman, but he's also a grandpa and a father.
Yeah, I mean, he does tend to have a different side of him when it comes to kids. I also think he is somebody, given the fact that he is sort of known as the TV president, right? Somebody that is really impacted by images, that a lot of information that he consumes, that he's affected by, comes from TV, comes from photographs. And this is something that is really hard to deny once you take a look at some of those images coming from Gaza. And he is somebody that's really focused much more on legacy and what it is that he wants his second and final term to be remembered for than he is for getting reelected and for continuing to play politics. Of course he does, but on issues like this, I mean, we've seen him really get very interested in winning a Nobel Peace Prize, and this is one of those things where I think he is less concerned by the partisan politics of it than he is on how he will be remembered for how he dealt with what is becoming irrefutably a historically tragic situation in Gaza.
Yeah, and it's fascinating just domestically. For over a decade now, we've seen MAGA bulldoze through any number of traditional GOP shibboleths, whether it's on deficit spending, the national debt, immigration. George W. Bush proposed a massive immigration overhaul that wouldn't pass muster on the right, possibly not even the left today.
Yeah.
And he's bulldozed through all of those things. And sort of the last one standing in many ways is this special relationship that the US has with Israel. And we're seeing people like Steve Bannon try to put a wedge between Netanyahu and Trump. Bannon, even back to the Iran missile attack, has said that this is Bibi's war, not Trump's war. And so they're sort of using this moment to question whether the American first doctrine is incompatible with the special relationship doctrine, this idea that America stands with Israel no matter what. The real question I'm hearing people ask within the MAGA movement, at least among the online influencers, is what happens when America first interests diverge with Israel's interest, and there's a gap there or a delta.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, there was a very simple answer for Republicans: you just stand with Israel. But the Republican Party is no longer super unified when it comes to foreign policy because of exactly what you described, Adam, which is that over the course of the Trump years, there's been this nationalism that has developed, and this isolationism that has developed that is contrary and sometimes really butts heads with traditional Republican foreign policy doctrine and hawkishness against certain countries and allyship with other countries. So there's not a super simple black and white answer here for the GOP at large. And that also has to do with this big tent that Trump has created. He has brought in isolationists, he's brought in the hawks, he's brought in everybody, which, like, for electoral purposes was great, but now for governing purposes is much more complicated. And so you've got a number of factors now that we've seen, whether it's Ukraine or Iran and now Israel and Gaza, where Republicans aren't unified in where they want to push their leadership to go. And at the end of the day, it is the Trump doctrine. And what America First is whatever Trump says it is. And we'll see how that plays as he takes action on this. But I do think that his relationship with Bibi is something that I want to really be digging into over the course of the next couple of days, because I think we've really seen it evolve from what he thought was going to be an easy, straightforward partnership to giving Bibi space in this really complicated time for Israel to do what he needs to do, to now, is this a point where certain aspects of that relationship and that partnership become untenable under these circumstances and really significantly need to change. And that's going to be a departure from how past presidents have treated this ally.
Yeah, and that brings us to our second story driving the day, which is Trump's wider focus on foreign policy. And you mentioned these difficult relationships that are somewhat more difficult than Trump forecast they would be before he came into office for a second time. And another one of those relationships being tested right now is with Vladimir Putin.
Mm.
He said on Monday that he was, quote, disappointed in Putin. What do you make of that?
Look, the way that President Trump deals with the strongman types like Putin is unconventional, is often criticized by people as giving too much credit to dictators, to authoritarians. The way Trump and his allies see it is he's doing art of the deal, right? He is pressuring when he feels like he needs to pressure. He's giving them space. He doesn't want to go hammer them really hard and create antagonism when he's trying to bring people to the table. However, I think that he has gotten to a place where he's felt, and he's said this publicly, he has felt tapped along by Putin, where what he's hearing when he calls him up and he's like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're on the same page. And then what he sees in news reports, and we talked about again the images, he's seeing the images of hospitals and schools and civilians getting attacked by Russia. And he's like, wait a minute, that's not what we talked about. And this is starting to reach a fever pitch. I think there are a lot of folks that were hoping it would happen sooner. There are some that in his party that also think stop getting involved in this completely. Again, this is the repeat pattern that we're seeing of Republicans not being unified on this, but I don't think that concerns Trump as much as figuring out what the next step is to put the screws to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Trump doesn't like to have the perception that he's being undermined or
Mhm.
gotten the better of. And it was fascinating Monday to see him give Putin the deadline of 10 to 12 days to turn this dynamic around. Of course, that's a little bit shorter than his typical deadline of 2 weeks. It's almost as if he felt he used that one last time as cover for his operation.
I think we're going to hear 2 weeks again.
Yeah, so he shortened it to 10 to 12 days, a little bit less than a fortnight, but certainly fascinating to watch this all play out. There are a lot of plates up in the air that he's spinning: Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Israel. It's fascinating to see him manage all of these
And
at
and
once.
he's diving into, like, Thailand now too. He it's interesting to see how this time around, it's still the America First doctrine, but his desire to be involved and to play peacemaker and to claim credit for finding solutions to these global conflicts is seems to really be on his mind right now in this way that I think has been a little bit surprising even to some of his supporters. I think the question is when and how does this all resolve, if it does?
Yeah, and it's all playing against the backdrop of Trump and MAGA adherents, people like Albert Colby at the Pentagon wanting to pivot to Southeast Asia
That's right.
and China as the 21st century threat. But there's still so many open threads that he's untangling at the moment. And the third big story that Washington is going to be talking about today, the MAGA revolution of federal government. And in the Senate, we're still expecting a vote on Emil Bove's controversial nomination to a federal judgeship. And yesterday, the Washington Post reported that a third whistleblower has stepped forward with allegations that he misled senators at his confirmation hearing. Dasha, what are you hearing about Emil Bove? It doesn't seem like the administration is backing down from this one.
No, they're not, especially given how much President Trump sees Emil Bove as someone who is loyal, who stuck by him through all the trials and tribulations, quite literally. This is somebody that defended President Trump when all of those indictments were coming down. And the pattern holds here this time around. There's no messing around when it comes to these nominations. The pressure is on Thune to get it done. There's been very little sign on the Hill, except for when it comes to Epstein, which is why it's such a big concern. But there's been very little sign on the Hill of dissent among Republicans, even when they've cried foul. They've raised concerns, but at the end of the day, other than the select few that have taken a stand, the vast majority have fallen in line. And so I would be very surprised if this were different. I think it would be a very big story if this were different. But as of now, I'm not hearing any serious panic from the White House on this, and certainly no signs of backing down, at least yet.
Yeah, and no backing down has really been the dominant theme of Trump 2.0.
That's right.
We've seen the DOJ investigating faculty at George Mason University. Harvard University is reportedly weighing a $500 million settlement with Trump. There's really no end to his stampede and lockdown of elite institutions. We're also seeing the education department launching an investigation into Duke, Stephen Miller's alma mater, if I'm not mistaken. What do you make of just this domineering rampage through all of these institutions, whether it's in Washington or some of these other coastal spots, Dasha?
Well, yeah, you have to keep in mind what and where these institutions are, right? These are institutions that the White House and Republicans at large are very eager also to see Democrats defend because they feel like the majority of Americans, certainly the voters that they are trying to court for the midterms and for 2028, are not particularly sympathetic to those institutions. They feel that voters feel distant from them, that they are far apart, they're elitist, that they look down on them, all of the things that Trump sort of fomented among his base and beyond on the campaign trail of there's the us and the them, and institutions like Harvard are the them in that equation. And so this is like home turf for them, like comfortable territory. And even if there are critical headlines, they welcome those with open arms. They wear it as a badge of honor when mainstream media criticizes them for going after these institutions because they feel that they've got a lot of Americans standing behind them. Is there a risk of going too far with that? Absolutely. But right now they feel very comfortable with their footing there.
Well, speaking of elite institutions, and we always try to end the show with something from the Playbook newsletter, one of the most elite cultural institutions in America and specifically in Washington is the Kennedy Center. Congressman Bob Onder, the Republican of Missouri, has introduced legislation to honor President Donald Trump by renaming the Kennedy Center as the Trump Center. Maria Shriver was among the Kennedy family members not thrilled by the prospect of the Donald J. Trump Center for the Performing Arts. She said, quote, "This is insane." She tweeted, it, quote, "makes my blood boil."
Okay, not holding back, Maria. Yeah, I think that would certainly create some headlines. It clearly already is just a suggestion of it. I would not be surprised if Mr. Richard Grenell, who is overseeing the Kennedy Center, was fully on board with this idea. But we will see how far it goes. I think Grenell has a couple of things on his mind this week, including the idea of Kamala Harris running for governor of California. Which, when I interviewed him, he said that would certainly make him consider running for governor of California as well. So there are a lot of questions about the future of the Kennedy Center and the future of its current president.
And you sat down and actually interviewed him.
At the Kennedy Center, that's right.
Have you been to a show at the Kennedy Center?
Yeah, I did. I went to go see Les Miserables. It was wonderful. I am a theater kid, a thespian at heart. But what was amazing is there were so many different kinds of people at that show. There were Washingtonians, there were school groups from Tennessee, there were college kids. It is the kind of place that gives accessibility to the arts. So regardless of where political winds take the name or the whatever, I do think it's a wonderful place to go enjoy the arts, and I hope it remains that way.
Certainly a storyline that we'll be following at the intersection of politics and culture. Dasha, as always, this was super informative. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
And that's all for today's show, but we have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.